This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, Concordant Body, Appendant Body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Hey, welcome back. You've joined us for an episode on Masonic leadership and a conversation I'll have with Right Worshipful Bill Edwards on the Maxwell Method. Now, normally when it comes to Freemasonry, leadership is probably not one of the core values you think about when it comes to transforming your life or maybe even a benefit of being a member of our fraternity. Well, Bill and I are going to challenge that concept on this episode as we look back at Dr. Maxwell, who in his own words said, leadership is not about titles, positions, or flowcharts. It's about one life influencing another. Keep that in mind as we kick off our conversation with Right Worshipful Bill Edwards, who's a 33rd degree Mason, MSA. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast, brother.
It's great to be back again. Thank you for having me.
I got to be honest, when you talked about the Maxwell Method, I've heard of Dr. John Maxwell mainly because of the motivational speaking, really looked at as a leader. I mean, the guy has sold more than 25 million books. He's been named by just about everybody as a management expert. But as far as like studying his work or understanding his methods, I'm not that familiar with the Maxwell Method. So what got you into John Maxwell's work, and specifically what areas were of interest to you?
It all started back when I was taking my master's program, and I had a course on motivational dynamics. And in that, I first became familiar with the idea of coaching. And often we hear coaching and mentorship. And coaching is around when you want to help someone like a sports coach, but in this case, we're talking about personal growth and development, go from where they are to where they want to be. Right? So you're helping them go to some place to get better, to get unstuck. The case of a mentor would be like a new brother joins the lodge and you want to mentor him on the culture of the lodge. You want to help look out for his growth to make sure that he attends and then may become an officer, may be able to help out with ritual. So with Maxwell, there is mentorship, but it's really around the idea of coaching. What specifically got me interested is in 2022, I had the opportunity to become a Maxwell certified coach, facilitator, and trainer, as well as speaker through the Grand Lodge Leadership and Educational Services program. So I attended a 3-day program as well as completing many hours of online training. What the value of that is to Masonry is that often you can attend a program like a Tony Robbins, right? Or you can go to a Dale Carnegie training or a Stephen Covey, or you can read books and you can say, hey, this stuff is really interesting, but we're not licensed to use it. By us becoming certified coaches, we now can take the Maxwell material and now we can apply that within Masonry to help with our personal growth and development and leadership development. Specific areas that I'm interested in is first the idea of personal growth and development. It's really to the heart of Masonry is that whole idea of how do I become better? The idea within joining Masonry is that we are temples and we are builders and we're constructing something. So it's not just saying, here I am and I exist, but it's how do I get better? And then ultimately we want to be of service to make a positive difference in the world. So for me, that's really a key piece of it. The other is around leadership, and that leadership is something that can be developed. It's not necessarily it's not related to a particular position. Often that we say that is the leader in a lodge, but in reality, we can all be leaders. And within Masonry, we're taught that we never know when that moment's going to happen, when our influence can make an impact. And that really speaks to me, and with what John Maxwell talks about is leadership development is something that we can all learn and improve. And the key to Maxwell is that he's simple. And he's often criticized because of that, because you can read his material and you say, I get it. And he's often on interviews, and someone will say, "Yeah, I get it. Your stuff is so simple and this and that." And he goes, "Yeah, but can you do it?" And that's when he gets them, because it's hard to apply but easy to understand. And I was joking with a friend today about, you know what? It's sort of like we all know there's this thing called exercise. And who knew there might be these places that we could go to, where they call gyms or exercise places or something, right? And we just went there, we could get healthier. I never knew. No one ever told me that my diet impacts my health. Here I am at this point in my life, and someone actually mentioned it, right? No, we've known that for many, many years. So it's not the knowledge that's difficult, it's the actual application. And that's the key to what I'm trying to bring to Masonry, is that we talk about all these ideals, aspirational goals that we want to accomplish, but then how do we actually do the intentional work of putting it into practice? And that's really what Maxwell can help us do, is take these ideas and then have a method, a practical approach to actually implementing them.
Some of the names that you mentioned, I jotted them down. I'm like, oh, Tony Robbins, yes. And again, I've never sat through one of his presentations. I only know him from the movie appearances that he'll make as himself, as a character, as a cameo. Dale Carnegie, I mean, I think anybody born at a certain year and time has heard of that name and is aware of him as an established leader. John Maxwell, yes, I've heard of him, and I want to talk a little bit about that 3-day course, because I'm looking at the books in my office here. Simon Sinek, Malcolm Gladwell, and then it goes down to like Sun Tzu and the Art of War. Like, I don't really have a Maxwell book in there. And as you said, like, you can read these, but it's the application of learning and putting them into use that makes it meaningful to you. So what happened during those 3 days?
It was a path to apply. So we all have these ideas of, I'd like to do this someday. So back when I first learned about coaching, I was all excited, but I didn't have the content. I didn't have the material. I didn't have a way to apply it. So it's knowing how to do something. You can have a love of sports and you read about football, you read about baseball. So it's all intellectual at that point. But then when you actually get in the game and do it, you start learning it and start applying it. And that's where Maxwell comes in, by going through those 3 days of training, as well as completing online courses. And there's conference calls that we can join into weekly to continue developing our skills so that we get better. And then by improving ourselves, then we can now help those, particularly in the fraternity, start their personal growth and development.
You touched on something really important in Freemasonry, where you'll have brothers, you'll sit down and talk with them, and maybe they're the ritualists. They can look at that book and memorize every word and every line in a short amount of time and tell you some of the story behind that. Or you'll have brothers that are really into the history, whether it's into the history of Freemasonry or America or just the history of the world. Then you have the esoterics. But I think one thing that's really valuable that gets left out of the conversation a lot are the leaders in Freemasonry. And it's so critical to our fraternity and our craft. It's a vital part of having somebody lead the meetings. It feels like if you go through the chairs over a certain number of years or time, you've earned the right to sit into the East. You've proven that you can be the master of the lodge. But that leadership element I feel it's just sorely missing in some lodges. How do you feel that we can apply, or what parts of the Maxwell method work?
So how Maxwell offers is a framework or approach, right? So you can look at leadership and you can say, okay, what is leadership? What are the skills that are related to it? When we look at 15 invaluable laws of growth, the first one is called intentional growth. And that's the key one, because growth just doesn't, growth may happen or may not. There's what's called accidental growth. So it may just be by circumstance. So let's say that I have a heart attack. That's going to now force me to change my diet and adopt certain lifestyle changes, right? So I've grown, I've changed, I've adapted habits. But that's not intentional. I didn't plan for that. I don't want to plan for that, right? But the idea is that in the lodge, you have what's called a trestle board that the master puts together for their lodge. The question I'm asking is, have you developed your personal trestle board? What is your intentional growth plan that you're going to commit to say, you know what? Yes, I want the lodge to do this, but now what am I going to do? So I'm going to improve how I communicate or how I build my relations with brothers. I'm going to pick a particular leadership skill. It could be organization. It could be whatever's related to it. It could be the idea of service leadership. particularly in our fraternity, it's not just about me, but it's about how do I make the lodge succeed? It's about giving back to the lodge, that the lodge, everyone rises together, right? So now these are these concepts or ideas that Maxwell brings forth. Now, when you're in a lodge officer position, you actually put that into practice. So that's how it goes hand in hand, because we have the quarry, if you will, of where the work can happen. Whether you're a senior deacon, a warden or master, or a trustee of the lodge, everyone can take on a leadership role. What I call leadership is really owning it in that moment. If you walk in and you see something that needs to be done and you step up and make a difference and you take care of it, you're a leader. It doesn't matter about your position. It doesn't matter about your title. It matters in that moment, did you use your influence in a positive way? So one of the things that's interesting is we asked the candidate a question similar of, why did you come here? And we have an answer. And I've adapted that answer, and I'm applying that within the Maxwell Method. And for me, it's to learn, to subdue my discordant passions, and improve myself in Masonry. And what's important about that is, first, the value of learning is you have to learn to have new ideas, new information, new understanding. So I think part of that approach is that questioning mindset. This is, I want to learn, I want to understand. And then with that, there's the application of when we say to subdue my discordant passions, that's really about self-regulation. And it's not the elimination of all passions. When we put the word discordant in there, it's saying those passions that are not in harmony with what I hope to accomplish. So sometimes, for instance, anger is appropriate. But the question really is the anger controlling you, or are you controlling the anger? And by learning to subdue our passions, we maintain control over our emotions and our thoughts. Right? So it's not that they're eliminated, it's that we're able to manage them, self-regulate them. In business terms, it would be called intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. Right? And then now they're looking at neuroscience and how we can get ahead of our emotions. Right? And that's really the name of the game, in that if you can understand when you feel an emotion happening and then you can manage that emotion, think of how powerful that would be, because then you can choose, is that the right emotion to have? And when we think about Freemasonry, right, our brothers understood this. When we go back to the 1700s, right, our degrees are laid out. The first degree deals with the physical space, in my interpretation. The second degree now goes into the middle chamber, or mind. And in that, we talk about the 7 liberal arts and sciences, which are both reflective of intellectual learning and emotional intelligence. So right there, we're saying both are important, and that in subduing those discordant passions, we bring both together. And then lastly, how do I improve myself, right? How do I grow? And that's all the symbols of Masonry are saying, that you are a temple. You are a builder of a temple more glorious than the Temple of Solomon. How can you apply these tools symbolically to yourself? And I think that's that idea of that you continually try to refine. And one of the beauties of Maxwell is that it's not about perfection. With his approach, there's the idea, and I've adapted this, that you learn some, you do some, you reflect on it, you refine, and you repeat. So by doing that, it's not that I have to go read the whole book. I need to pick one thing today. That's intentional growth. What are you going to do today differently? And then you make that commitment to yourself, and then you say, okay, I'm going to do this. In my own case, I've been applying the Maxwell different ideas to my own personal growth and development. So I came up with the idea of a checklist as one of the things where you're looking at. It's called the law of consistency. By having a checklist of, did I do this today? Did I do that today? So forth, and you go on, you can then reflect on, how did it go, right? Did I drink the water I wanted to? Did I eat the food I wanted to? So by applying that approach, I've lost between 20 to 25 pounds over the last 6 to 9 months. Also, this past year, I got caught up in the tech industry layoffs, and I applied the Maxwell approach of trying to keep a positive mindset, right? To be proactive, to not say, can I do this, but how do I? Those simple words, changing it, right? From can I do this to how do I do this? How do I make this happen? Right? Now you're already committed and invested to making it happen. So those are just little things within Maxwell, that just changing that mindset. right? When you walk into a room, and the good news with that is I applied it and I was able to find new employment pretty quickly. I'm actually in a better situation than I was. I've improved my communication skills. My relationships have improved, both within family and friends. So for me, I've seen incredible benefit from actually doing it.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Talk about a unique Masonic item. BricksMasons.com is featuring a 36-inch tubal cane. It's crafted from seasoned, durable, and sturdy wood. It also has two balls inside a four-sided chamber, a nod to, tubal cane, making this both a functional cane as well as a desirable Masonic collectible. You can order yours for under $100 now at BricksMasons.com. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Brothers, do you remember how you felt when you were first called to Freemasonry? The excitement of each degree? If you can still feel that call of the East, you're encouraged to apply to join the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The Scottish Rite offers Master Masons like you an opportunity to continue your Masonic journey and delve deeper into our craft through their 29 degrees. And there's an easy way to join the Scottish Rite. It's called Join the Rite Night, a virtual initiation where you can witness the requisite fourth degree and officially become a Scottish Rite Mason. There's 7 opportunities to join online from February 1st to April 25th. Here's what you do. Visit the Scottish Rite online at srnmj.us and click on the Join button. You can also join in person at a Scottish Rite reunion near you. Your journey to the 32nd degree in Freemasonry awaits. Take the first step at srnmj.us and click on the Join button today. Bill, I don't think anyone, when you look back on all of the topics that people have written about Freemasonry, I don't think anyone has really sat there and said, hey, here are some leadership aspects that are clearly in our ritual that are discussed with us outside of what you see in like the traditional officer line. Like, for example, you shared a great personal story. One that always comes to my mind is the word that we're presented as an entered apprentice when we're placed in the northeast corner. And I use that word every time when I'm in a business meeting. I can't tell you how many times it has saved my bacon when I sit there and hear myself literally just say caution before I say something in a meeting. I really think about those words. And as you talked about having control over your actions and your emotions is, I think, almost just as powerful as having control over your words and thoughts. Because I can cheat. I can write down my notes and look back at them in my slippery handwriting, and I know what I'm writing here. But being able to take feedback, critical feedback or positive feedback, and keep a regulated appeal to it, like that's what we look for when we look at the term or share the word strong leader, is someone who's able to have that back and forth and doesn't lose control or fly off the handle.
So I think to build on that, within Masonry, we all love our ritual book. And what I sort of call that is the 5 W's of Masonry: the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why, right? But what's missing is the intentional how of actually doing the work, right? So that's where I see Maxwell ties into Masonry, because it becomes a method for personal growth and development. What I put it as is that Maxwell can be applied to Freemasonry as a practical method for brothers to do what I call the great work. And what I mean by the great work is that that goes back to all these esoteric concepts we talk about. So one of the things I'm trying to do with Maxwell is it doesn't matter if I'm trying to meditate, whether I'm trying to put prayer into my daily life, or I'm trying to build better relationships. You can use the same practices to develop those skills. So for me, I see the great work as spiritual alchemy, or I would even call it the magnum opus or their masterpiece, which is our life. right? So the idea being is that now it's gone from just doing work haphazardly to saying, what is my intentional trestle board for my life? What am I going to do in my life that I want to build something of meaning and of value with who I am? That then at the end of my life, in a sense, you can turn in your masterpiece, your magnum opus, and you can say, how'd I do? Right? Much like we turn in that work to the senior warden, right? Is it worthy and, well qualified to receive the wages of a mason? How'd I do? Right? And it's not about perfection. It's about learning, doing, applying, refining. And all those three aspects are in masonry, which is so important because sometimes we'll say, oh, the physical world doesn't matter. Or nope, we're only going to deal with knowledge, right? And we're going to let the emotions, we don't care about emotions. They don't really matter. They're not relevant. No, they're very useful and important. And then lastly, or it's just my focus is on my spiritual end goal, right? But now looking at it holistically within a Masonic approach, we're not saying go off and live outside of the world. We're saying, no, live within the quarries of life. Live and improve yourself physically, mentally, meaning emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And now what is Masons, right? We have that journey for life. For light. And what is light can mean truth. It can mean many things to different brothers, right? But if we think about it, we came into the lodge and we said, where'd you come from? But now when you leave after your obligation, everybody's going for the same purpose. Seek what was lost and to find more light.
So you've sold me. I want to learn more about this. How do we do this? Have you put together a step-by-step guide? Is there a resource that we can share with brothers, a website, a program? How can we learn to implement the Maxwell Method in our lodge?
So what we're doing is we're rolling it out across the state. The first one that we're doing is called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. What that really starts with is the idea of connecting principles and how the connection can increase my influence, how I can focus on others. It goes beyond words, about putting energy when you present. And lastly, it's about skill more than natural talent. So those are sort of those connecting principles that it's based upon. Then it goes to the practices. And we know this within Masonry. And what I love about this is when Maxwell offers certain ideas, they fit right within the Masonic teachings. So that's why I'm so excited that their line, the first is finding common ground. That's Masonry. We're a brotherhood, and we're all about the idea that it's not what divides us, but what unites us. So we already have a leg up on common ground of finding how we can work together. And then connectors keep it simple. That's part of the Maxwell Method we spoke about, is you don't need to make it complicated. I love the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar. You think of that rough ashlar is that state that we're in. And often we think of the perfect ashlar is perfection, and we mean without blemish. I often within Masonry look at alternate definitions of words. And when we look at perfection, it also means wholeness or completeness. And they say when, I believe it was Michelangelo was doing his carvings, he didn't create it, like he was removing everything around it to find that beautiful masterpiece within. So really that then becomes our challenge, is that we already have what's complete within us. The challenge is, how do we bring that out? So that changes that whole focus of rough ashlar to perfect ashlar. Is it's not about just restricting oneself and using the compasses to, eliminate our desires. It's about using that so we're self-regulated, so then we can find the beauty within. And we talk about the sprig of acacia, and one of the symbolisms I love with that is the idea of that it's flourishing. So at that moment in life, we flourish into the fullness of who we can become. And that really speaks to me about what this journey is. It's not just about being perfect. It's not about always doing the right thing, because we know that's not possible. But if it's about becoming the best version of who I can be, that's incredible. And if we offer that as the value statement of Masonry, is that in a world where people are struggling, in a world that's divisive, in a world that people feel there's no meaning or purpose, we say, no, we have real meaning here. We walk the talk. We have a tradition that's 300 years old. We're not only going to teach you that, you're not only going to experience that through our rituals, we're going to give you the skills to how now you can apply that in your daily life. And you're going to get better as a Mason. You're going to get better as a family member. You're going to get better as an employee, and you're going to get better in your community. And now your influence, as we say, is going to increase. And that's what leadership is it's all about influence.
It is so refreshing to hear when we talk about being like-minded in Freemasonry. A lot of the terms and the way that you describe things, very similar with how I try to present the benefits of Freemasonry to brothers in the craft and those that have an interest in it. I really want to get your take on one phrase that is a buzzword, not just to me. I live this, I believe this, and you talk about this in your presentation, servant leadership. And I've been asked by people, oh, well, what does servant leadership mean? And to those who know, I say, I think servant leadership is Freemasonry. That's what it means to be a Mason. That the first question, as you pointed out, is not what's good for me, but what's good for others, what's good for the lodge. One example that I had is one of the emails I signed up for, and a question that popped up, and a way to think about it that made me think of you this morning was, instead of asking, what can I do for others? What can I do that others are hesitant to ask about, was a way of being a servant leader. How do you describe servant leadership, Bill?
So I'm going to go back to John Maxwell. I'd put some material together for the Scottish Rite, and one of their values is service. And they talk about, by our very nature, we live to serve our brethren and our communities, is their value. So I took from his two of his books. In this case, it actually was one book, Developing the Leader Within You. And he has the quote, the heart of leadership is based upon serving others, not ourselves. Right? Very simple, but very profound. And that's Maxwell. And then servant leadership defines the success of others as their success. Think about that. It's the success of others is my success. It's not my success first. I'm looking for, how do I make you successful? And he has 4 aspects of that, 4 questions you can ask. What can I do for people to help them succeed? What do people need from me daily that they may not want to ask? And that's exactly your point, right? So how do I, right? And then what can I work on that will help me serve people better? So now it takes it from my personal growth and development, is not then just about how does I become a better Bill, but how does Bill become better at helping others, right? Much different focus, right? Abraham Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs, which is, very popular, right? And that idea of where we go from, if we're not able to have food and shelter, it's very hard to think about other things, right? We're very fortunate that we're able to meet in our lodges. Right? In other parts of the world, they're not able to right now. But then as we gain more security, we get to things like self-esteem, and eventually it becomes something that's called self-actualization. And with self-actualization, you start thinking about, what am I going to be? And it's all about I. Later in his life, Maxwell and his students added this idea of transcendence. And I think that's the ultimate piece that we understand in Freemasonry, is you transcend yourself. That once you get to a certain point, it's not about making me any better. It's about, what can I give to help others? How do I transcend myself? And then, how will I know I am serving people well? Is the last question he has, right? So how do I gauge that? We often think about, well, how do I know about my own success? Right? Is it the amount of money that I have? Is it that I have this car, this material? However you define that. But stepping back and saying, well, how do I define the success of my officers in your lodge? How do I define that the senior warden is successful? To be prepared to become master. What does that look like? And then work with them to come up with that intentional growth plan to say, you know what, you're really good here, but you need to get out and know the brothers. Right? That's your weakness, because you came in quick, you don't know everybody. So one of the Maxwell method ideas is that you go first. So when you walk into a situation, connectors go first. So some would call it working the room, but it's just having that mindset of going in, hello, brother, how are you tonight? It's good to see you. I'm the senior warden, right? Doing those kinds of things. So again, just simple ideas, and then how do you apply it, right? As an example.
You've given a lot of great tips for individuals and brothers listening to step up their game, so to speak, as we get into this new year and really developing a new you. In getting ready for this podcast episode, I actually listened to the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. No surprise, I actually have 3 different podcasts for the Maxwell group. And the episode focused around leadership expectations. And I really was fascinated by this. Some of the key takeaways were Your life must be influenced by your expectations, not your experience. You've mentioned this. Great leaders set high expectations for themselves and others. And then the last point was great leaders communicate clearly how those expectations look. As we get ready to close out this episode on Masonic leadership and examining that Maxwell method, looking through that lens, what advice do you have for lodge leaders or leaders of Scottish Rite Valleys who are listening on simple things that they can do after hearing this podcast in their next meeting and beyond?
I think a way to do that is that attitude of owning it. In my training, I talk about, I like going back to mythology and biblical tradition, and one of them is the Garden of Eden. And if they had owned that, right, instead of running away, but if they had owned that experience, how different all our religions would be. So I think that's a fundamental piece of leadership, is saying, I own this. I accept responsibility for it. I'm going to make it happen. Not can I do it, but how do I? And then I think another key piece when you talk about having that vision is that goal. And you need to set the goal realistic to your lodge. So that's one of the things in Maxwell that we talk about is knowing your environment and really being able to judge that. He has a book called When You Put Your Dream to the Test. And part of that is making sure that it's realistic. So in your lodge, if you're suddenly say, you know what, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but we only have 10 active members, you may not be able to do all of that. And then you're going to burn everybody out. So I think getting everybody to collectively come up with a goal, and maybe on your membership, it's if you have 15 active members, how do I get 5 more to attend? And you focus on things like that because you want it to be achievable. The other thing that's important is that if you have a goal and things always come up, you don't lower that goal because of experience. So if you're putting on a degree and suddenly you can't get the cast that you want, you don't say, well, we're going to do a poor degree now, right? You say, okay, what do I need to do to ensure that quality experience? Well, maybe I have to move the date. Well, we can't move the date. Why? Right? But you step back and you say, no, the goal of doing a quality degree is more important than sticking to my calendar. Right? Or maybe I need to ask brothers to come in. So it's really not holding to what should I do, but how do I make it happen? Right? And it's a different mindset because we get locked into, well, it should be this way. No, it's only because we think it's that way. That's what they call fixed thinking, right? But if you go in with an open mindset, you say, no, what are the possibilities? What can I do to get there? How do I make it happen? Well, maybe we have to have another lodge come and do the degree with us. So in my role as district deputy, one of the goals I had in our district was owning it. And the example I use is that it seems in other aspects of our life, people own it. We'll pick sports. Brothers are getting together to go to a Bills football game in Western New York, right? They don't try to buy their ticket or plan their tailgating the Sunday morning of the game, right? They've bought their tickets well in advance. Right? They know when they're going. They know where they're going. They have all their food, everything laid out. But those same brothers show up to lodge and say, no, I didn't have time to open the ritual book. I'm sorry. Why? And it's asking those why questions. The why don't you get the same excitement out of it? Or you come here, so why don't you get something out of it? It's the same thing with a dinner, right? Masons notoriously do not make dinner reservations. But if they're going out with their spouse on a Friday night, right? They know they're not going to call up Friday night and get that special dinner, right? Or whomever they're going out with, friends or whomever, right? So it's, again, bringing those same kind of behaviors that we have elsewhere in life into Masonry. There's brothers who excel professionally, but then consistently drop the ball within Masonry. Why is that? So it's asking those tough questions, right? It's called holding up the mirror, right? To see value in yourself, but also then to see how you really are. How are my behaviors impacting what's happening?
I got a tough question before we close this one out. And it came to me, and I'm almost embarrassed to ask because I feel this is one of the biggest problems that we have in the craft right now when it comes to members and interaction and engagement. And I read this somewhere else, and they talked about the fact that right now we're kind of living in a joiner/follower society. And some of that is coming from like the post-COVID mindset that people just aren't as engaged as they used to be with groups or organizations. And honestly, Bill, I'm not just seeing this in my lodge here, but I'm also seeing this with my running group that meets on Sundays. Nobody wants to take the lead in planning like what the route is going to be or where things are going to go. Everybody's just happy to show up, throw in their $10 and go take off for a run. how can we change that? How can we transition from a joiner follower culture to a leader culture?
Interesting question. I think it's having those tough conversations,
Mm,
and then it could be shared leadership as well, right? Often we look for the one person who's going to be the silver bullet, but you could approach it from a teamwork. So someone could say, you know what, as a team, I'm going to organize it. Who's willing to help out? So now you take that big thing that's really scary and you break it into a few pieces, and you pick the one thing you're going to tackle. So I think that may be an opportunity, and it may be that you say, okay, how do I make this happen? Right. So if it's about re-engaging brethren, well, then you go through your membership list and you find all the brethren who have attended lodge in the last year, right? And you get, so those are your likely brother who could show up. So then you figure, okay, well, I'm going to call them and I'm going to repeatedly reach out. And our goal is to get 5 new brothers to come, for instance, if you're looking to get, attendance, or if you're looking with your officers to get active, to bring some passion and importance to it of why it matters, right? That what they get out of it, the value that they get out of it. And I think bringing some of those things into it, because it's a return on investment, so that they see that it's just, instead of just accepting the lackluster results, what am I actually going to get out of this? And I think by tying that into that, then there's something that, if I put my time and energy into it, I'm going to get something out of it. It's going to benefit me and it's going to benefit the lodge, right? That's the win-win. So if you think about it, there's leader and there's doer. And if you're the leader and you're doing all the doing, then you don't really have any followers. So the idea is that you're building a team, right? It's not about everything that I accomplish and everything that I do, but it's even better developing a shared vision. So we often think in terms of the master sets the trestle board, but having that as a conversation between the master and the wardens, right? So now it becomes a 3-year plan for the lodge that everybody feels invested in.
That's going to do things for this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. I want to thank my guest this week, Right Worshipful Bill Edwards, 33rd degree MSA. If you'd like to watch Bill's presentation on living our Scottish Rite values by applying the Maxwell Leadership Method, make sure to check the show notes for this episode for the YouTube video link. And finally, if you've enjoyed this podcast episode and you want to hear some more of Craftsman Online, make sure to hit that follow button on Spotify or subscribe and listen on Apple Podcasts. We've got new episodes for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.